Welcome back. Time is 8:13. You're looking live at our nation's capital as the country counts down to the next leader preparing to move into the executive mansion. President-elect Trump will be inaugurated into his second term in just a few hours. That ceremony is scheduled to start at noon, followed by a presidential parade down Pennsylvania Avenue. Once Trump takes office, he's expected to act quickly with executive orders prepared to jumpstart deportations, increase fossil fuel development, and reduce civil service protections for government workers. Joining us now live to break down this historic day, Dr. Susan Roberts, professor at Davidson College. Dr. Roberts, good morning and thanks for being here.
Good morning. Thank you.
So let's start right there. Obviously, we know that Trump has said day one is going to be a busy one, but we were talking before he came on camera here. You're interested to see how he talks about day one and some of the words that he may or may not use.
Sure. I think it's important how he frames his second administration. We already know we've had his plan, Trump 47, we've had Project 2025, and we've had a lot of things in which he is recycling ideas. So I want to see, quite frankly, does he use the word weaponization? Does he say woke? Does he say culture wars? I doubt highly that he'll say the Biden administration. He will say the previous administration, the previous 4 years. And will he say some words about our border that are very dramatic? So I think that's what I'm looking for, because usually in presidential addresses, they have things like the mantle of responsibility. There is some humility. There is some reference to the Constitution. Let's see if he says the Constitution.
It's going to be interesting for sure to see in terms of if he goes on the attack immediately. And speaking of, weaponization, we've already seen this morning some breaking news. President Biden issuing pardons for people like Dr. Anthony Fauci, General Mark Milley, members of the House committee that investigated the January 6th attack on the Capitol. A lot of people who were involved in that attack, they're also very interested to see what soon President Trump will do in terms of pardoning those. Do we expect that to happen pretty quickly today?
I think we expect it very quickly. I think it was very unusual to have the pre-inauguration rally. I think he got the MAGA rhetoric out of his system. There wasn't, it was a rally. It was what he wanted. He needs a crowd to feed off of. He's in the rotunda now. The irony of January 6th, will he say that in very specific terms? So I think that he will not say he wants to be a dictator on day one. But last time around, when he was inaugurated, he did issue around 60 executive orders. Some were very benign, for some were important, like the Muslim ban. I think we'll see that again in the executive orders today. One of the things said before sundown, very dramatic, dictator before sundown.
One of the things, too, that could be on the same scale as that is the mass deportations. Word got out that some cities like Chicago are preparing for a mass deportation of undocumented immigrants. We don't know exactly the specifics of that, but that's something that we imagine to happen probably this afternoon after Trump is sworn in and he can start signing executive orders.
That will be the one thing to see how the rhetoric is implemented. Some say we need to find out if these are really violent criminals. We only have to have the reports. Pam Bondi said the same thing, and Mike Johnson said the same thing. So how are they going to find out who these violent, undocumented workers are? That will take place today. That is a cornerstone of his pledge to the country. Will he say the Department of Government Efficiency? That's also interesting. That might be something that is a signal of things to come without saying what is a signal of things to come, which is deregulation.
I would almost say a Freudian slip there saying company, as Donald Trump often runs America like the companies that he has had. I do want to talk about, as you look at the first 100 days, we know that's critical to an administration and setting the path forward. What do you expect for the next 100 days of the Trump presidency?
I think we'll have the blueprint. I don't know that we'll have the details. And I think there will be that energy. I don't know what will happen to Republicans are going to stay in line. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And I think there's no doubt about the extent and the rapidity in which he's going to do this. He is going to move quickly. He has made that promise to the media, to the American public. And I think we can just look to see how far reaching these are. And I expect they'll be very far reaching. He's told us as much. Mike Johnson said there's a feeling of anticipation in the nation's capital. And there are people that anticipate the good and the bad and people that are anxious and excited. He pledged unity, fairness, and freedom. And I don't know, those could be interpreted many different ways.
That is true. And also we know that he will get a little bit of his crowd there, mentioning that they're going to have the Capital One Arena where he'll go to after he's sworn in and he signs those executive orders. He's expected to meet with people over there. Do you think it takes away at all from the inauguration ceremonies having to move it inside the Capitol Rotunda? I mean, it's been 40 years since we've seen anything like this.
Well, I don't think we can question his motives. I think it is going to be cold, the wind chill. I think it gives him both venues, big rally, and also the kind of solemn in the rotunda that he can really assume the mantle of power. I think it's turned out pretty well for him. I don't know that we can say that it was only because he wanted a different venue. The weather did have something, but I think it provides him both avenues and behooves his administration.
Well, it is going to be an interesting day for sure with the Trump inauguration and seeing the flurry of executive orders promised. Dr. Roberts, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'm sure we'll have you back on very soon. As we know one thing with the Trump administration, we'll have plenty of things to talk about.
Thank you.